if I can just brief you very quickly. Welcome to everybody. As you can see, it is now Tuesday the 13th. We will be beginning in a minute's time or so. If we can please just request that you remain on mute. You sign into the webinar on the chat room, and you just let us know that you're here. It's just a record that we have then in writing of all of our attendees. Please keep your cameras off unless you are speaking. You're welcome to comment, you're welcome to question. We will be having a Q&A session after the presentation. So if we can ask you, you are welcome to type your questions into the chat line, and we will cover them in consecutive order. If you wish to say something, if you can please raise your hand, and we will hopefully pick it up and be able to carry on with that. The program for today is just very, very brief. We're just going through a few house rules now, after which we will have a short presentation by AUS-Setting, the President of Life Saving South Africa. Then a presentation by Justin Scarr, the CEO of Royal Life Saving Australia and the Chair of the International Life Saving Federation's Drowning Prevention Commission, followed by Dr. Colleen Capistanho near Saunders, who is the Life Saving South Africa convener of the Scientific Advisory Panel. Then we will have our Q&A session and a short vote of thanks, and the next session as presented by Mr. Mzi Mayedwa. With that, I am going to hand over to AUS-Setting, the President, to continue with his presentation.
Okay, very good morning to all of our participants. And it is really an honor indeed to welcome you and host you at this inaugural Drowning Prevention Alliance webinar. I think it's been a long time coming. Many of you will recall that you joined us in hosting the World Conference on Drowning Prevention in October, just a couple of days over a year ago in Durban. And at the conference itself, we indicated that we will facilitate a process to establish hopefully what will become a water safety council. I will explain the differences in a bit, but it's really a pleasure indeed to have all of you participating. I'm very encouraged to see we have our partners from government, from municipalities across the country, Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, Durban, Tshwane, Bloemfontein, our partners in the Aquatic Sports Federation, canoeing, stand-up paddling, KZN Aquatics and other organizations, drowning prevention partners like NSRI and Princess Charlene of Monaco. And we're especially encouraged to have so many participants from all over the world. I don't want to go through the list, but we encouraged to have Norm Farmer. I consider him to be almost the father of the World Conference on Drowning Prevention. Dr. Shane Baker, Justin Scarr, our guest presenter, and of course, Javier Archibald from Princess Charlene of Monaco Foundation, all the way in Monaco. So our colleagues from India and Peru, a big welcome to all of you. And I hope we can actually learn from your experience as well on the journey that we actually will be embarking on. This particular event, I think it comes at quite a it comes at quite a coincidental time in our country. We do know that we've all been locked down during the pandemic. We had originally planned to kickstart the Drowning Prevention Alliance at the end of March after the competition season that Life Saving South Africa normally hosts. But with the lockdown being imposed at that time, it was very difficult to organize. Hence, we kind of lost out about 7 months. But be that as it may, I'm sure we will be able to pull back on some of the targets. You know, it's quite coincidental. For many of you who watched the news last night, you would notice that the outcomes of the inquest into the passing of a young schoolboy, Enoch Mpianzi, was featured on our news. It was very sad indeed that a young lad had lost his life on a school excursion, having drowned whilst there were some activities in the nearby river. And I think you know the outcome of the inquest. I'm not going to deal with that, but you know, we hope that with our Drowning Prevention Alliance and with our engagement with education authorities, with government, with all levels of government in our country, we will not have to experience another incident like the sad demise of Enoch Mpianzi. By the way, I have been invited on ENCA tonight to comment on the Enoch Mpianzi matter. And at the same time, the news editor team is very keen to hear that we're launching the Drowning Prevention Alliance. And they've will give some airtime to the fact that we've embarked on this journey of establishing an alliance. So hopefully we will get more airtime on national television as this initiative rolls out. Okay, so with those few words, I'm going to go straight into a couple of slides. So Helen, if you could move it on. As I did mention, the intent was to actually establish this soon after we completed a World Conference on drowning prevention. For those of you who attended will recall that it was a highly successful event, both in its organization and in the content and in the level of presentations. For those of you who missed it out, we do have a link that we could share with you to catch up on all of the presentations, both oral and poster presentations, as well as all of the other presentations from other conferences archived in the International Life Saving Federation website. So I did say that we were disrupted due to the COVID pandemic. However, we reconvened today to pick up on our intent to form a Drowning Prevention Alliance. Basically, I think if I recall, the mandate from the conference to all of us, particularly in South Africa and in our neighboring states, was to coordinate drowning prevention and water safety activities, to promote research on various aspects of drowning prevention, and to develop and execute implementation plans to prevent drowning. So the first in the series, we envisage that this particular webinar will be a series of webinars that will eventually culminate in the establishment of a formal alliance. I'm covering the purpose. We have Mr. Justin Scull who will deal with the international experience. And then we have our convener of the Scientific Advisory Committee, Dr. Colleen Saunders, who will map a way forward. So moving along. Okay, in terms of our conceptual plan, we believe that this may be a 2 to 3 year journey, that hopefully all of you that are present today and many more will stay the course with us to organize and mobilize stakeholders, right? So their vision is to host a series of these webinars, seminars, workshops, and mini conferences that eventually will culminate in the formation of a National Water Safety Council. Talking about a series of workshops and mini conferences, I think we're very encouraged to see one of our partners, the NSRI, is hosting a symposium on the 28th of October at the end of this month with a very interesting program, which in my opinion is the kind of building blocks that we all will put together in terms of a series of seminars, webinars, workshops, etc. Helen or Dr. Cleve Robertson, who's present, probably will put up some details on the chat forum of that particular event, or we'll circulate it. So all of these events should be able to deliver on concrete campaigns, especially along the lines of rolling out national campaign on water safety, to develop an approach to roll out common signage across the country. Because if you drive around from town to town, beaches to beaches. You see signage that, says different things. We'd love to collaborate with everybody on swimming skills programs. In all of this, we should ensure quality. We should ensure that there's effective monitoring and there's ongoing research and evaluation of everything that we want to do. And then, of course, we do know that at WCDP 2019, Gemma May announced the whole initiative on the UN Declaration of Drowning. So hopefully our alliance will also become a firm supporter to ensure that the United Nations does adopt and roll out the UN Declaration of Drowning. That's not an exhaustive list. I'm just giving you a sense of what we want to do. And again, emphasize that all of these efforts should culminate in the National Water Safety Council, which hopefully becomes a statutory body. Moving along. So the question is, why should we establish a statutory council? Well, certainly we've looked at the experiences, and Justin will share more of that. We believe that a body like a Water Safety Council should be representative of all organizations involved in water safety and drowning prevention. We should be able to pool our resources, our expertise, and collaborate for a common cause. We should be able to ensure that the drowning data is authentic, right? So we don't have different databases all across the country. We should be able to create common repositories and make educational resources available to all of our country folk. And of course, as I said, we should be able to roll out common educational programs in the schooling sector. But most importantly, what we believe that a Water Safety Council should have the authority to influence and ensure that legislation is enacted to prevent drowning and to hold authorities accountable. Just to give you, a couple of quick examples. I mean, I mentioned the sad demise of Enoch Mpianzi. If there was firm legislation around safety of children on school excursions, then we could have possibly prevented a tragedy like that. We do know, for example, there's lots of people that own domestic pools. We should be able to partner with the real estate industry. And just as when you purchase a house, you expect to get a COC, an electrical compliance certificate. You expect to get a pest compliance certificate. Maybe we should come to a day very, very soon where you should also get a compliance certificate around pool fencing and pool covers and pool locking mechanisms to ensure that we can prevent domestic tragedies in households by having legislation that actually rules on that. So to kick off, I want to introduce our international guest presenter, Mr. Justin Scar, and give you a quick background on the next slide. As Helen had indicated, Justin is a long-time supporter of Life Saving South Africa. He's currently the CEO of Royal Life Saving. He's also the chairperson of the International Life Saving Federation Drowning Prevention Commission. So one of his key roles has been the conference program director for the previous 4 world conferences. He's contributed to drowning prevention programs across the globe, certainly influenced, supported, assisted on programs, water safety plans, and establishment of water safety councils in many nations. And most importantly, was the key movers and shakers in his involvement with the institutionalization of the Australian Water Safety Council. And I'm sure he's going to then, give us some of those experiences that we can learn from. So over to you, Justin. And maybe Justin, when you're done, if you could quickly introduce Colleen after your presentation. So over to you, sir.
Okay, thank you, Daya. It's a terrible slide. I think we might skip that one, Helen. I should update my bio photo. Listen, good evening, good morning, everyone. It's fantastic to see such a wonderful list of names and real diversity of areas of interest and background from all across South Africa and also of course, internationally. It is 12 months almost to the day that we celebrated the World Conference on Drowning Prevention in Durban 2019. And for me, there were many highlights from that event. Coming to understand a little bit about your nation was certainly one highlight. The collegiality across the international drowning prevention community was world class. And I certainly appreciated being able to surf before a conference at 5 o'clock in the morning on the wonderful beaches of Durban. My objectives tonight, or this morning for you, tonight for me, is to provide some stimulus to your own journey and discussions about the formation of a Water Safety Council, a Water Safety Forum, and whichever model that you ultimately choose. So to do that, I'm going to focus on the 2 WHO objectives, which is one is to coordinate water safety agendas, and the second one is the development of water safety plans. It's not a comprehensive presentation, it's more a light touch on a range of themes that might help you as you navigate this very noble and worthwhile agenda. And there's lots of decision points, both organisationally, collectively, but also individually. I do think that we all bring a different expertise and perspective on water safety often, and so melding that difference is the key to success in the ultimate goal of reducing drowning or promoting water safety. And I might talk a little bit about the difference between those 2 objectives as we go through the presentation. Next slide, please. Generally, when I present internationally, I start with a slide which for me was very much what was my perception of water safety and drowning prevention. And indeed, when the Australian Water Safety Council was first formed in 1996, and I wasn't necessarily involved instrumentally at that point, I was just an observer at a conference, but it was very much the coming together of the existing water safety organisations at the time, which was Surf Lifesaving Australia, which is very similar to Lifesaving South Africa, a big, wonderful volunteer movement that focuses very much on beaches and flags and equipment and sport and lifeguards. And at the time, certainly now, they also focus on coastal water safety. Royal Lifesaving Australia, which has a wonderful commitment to water safety education, child drowning prevention, life-saving volunteers, pool lifeguards in pools. And then in Australia at the time, there was very much a focus on what we called national disgrace, which was the burden of child drowning, which was principally in backyard swimming pools. And, back then there was probably 80 or 90 Australian children drowned every year in that environment alone. And it was very much the catalyst for the first Australian Water Safety Council and the first Australian Water Safety Plan. And that plan sort of brought together the agendas and perspectives of 3 or 4 organisations, principally Surf Lifesaving and Royal Lifesaving, along with an organisation called Kids Safe that tends to focus on child injury. But our first efforts were very much starting with a government mandate that allowed us to create a council, but the throwing together of what in those days we called water safety, and very much that was our focus. But drowning has changed somewhat. And so I ask you the question, when you think about drowning, when you think about drowning prevention, what are some of the first things that come into your mind, whether that be the problem that you're trying to define or identify, or whether it's the sorts of things that you feel that you do at an organisational level or an individual level to prevent, to reduce, to stop, to rescue from drowning. Next slide, please. I really do think that over the last few years, this has fundamentally shifted. The international community used to come together, and someone mentioned Norm Farmer earlier, certainly the father of the World Water Safety Conference in Porto in 2007. And certainly that was one of the first international conferences where we started to truly appreciate that there was this context of drowning that was recreational, which was very much about swimming and lifeguarding, and that sort of, had very real meaning to organisations like my own. But then the other part of drowning was this 90% of drowning, which occurred in low and middle income countries, which had a very different context to the rescue and recreational focus of drowning prevention that we had become familiar with. And certainly presentations from Bangladesh really showed us that there was this context of drowning in everyday life. And fundamentally, that was a different exposure. It wasn't people having holidays. It wasn't people in their leisure time, but it was people that were interacting with water in a very different range of contexts, whether that's water used for irrigation, whether it's water used for bad sanitation, bad plumbing, whether it was water that was moving through the watercourse during flooding. Fundamentally, there was a shift there in our perception of what water safety and also what drowning prevention was all about. And so together we've been on a 15-year journey, largely redefining drowning prevention, broadening our scope. And part of that is really about a public health approach to drowning prevention or water safety. And it's really starts with data, it starts with a situational analysis, and it starts with a really thorough understanding of what the issues are. And so if your first objective in the South African water safety agenda is to reduce drowning, then obviously the first thing you must do is fully and comprehensively understand the problem. Understand the problem not just from numbers, but also understand the problem as a lived experience at a community level. And given the diversity of people on this webinar, I think you are well placed to define and understand the problem as your communities experience it. Next slide, please. This agenda has sort of continued and been fleshed out by the World Health Organization. And so you can kind of see the very real context of drowning and drowning prevention. And I remember one of my favorite presentations from the Durban conference was the image that Colleen presented of a helicopter view of a community in Joburg. And then on one side of the street was some houses with backyard swimming pools, very much like what we would deal with in Australia. And on the other side of the street was a very, very different setting where the water safety risk was fundamentally different. And I think that was a really good illustration of the complexity of drowning prevention across South Africa. Next slide, please. So the World Health Organization has really changed the game for us as water safety life-saving professionals. Many of you, and if you haven't, I'd encourage you to have a good look at the Global Report on Drowning. It's a World Health Organization document, but many of us from across the globe have contributed to this particular document, which has reframed drowning from recreational life-saving in focus into the notion that it's an emerging public health threat, and that's one that we should increasingly focus and look at from a public health perspective. But I think increasingly what we'll realise is that the public health perspective on drowning is just one lens, and increasingly we'll start looking at it through a disaster lens. And I note that there's some people from Western Cape from the disaster risk reduction section of government there. And I do think that drowning intersects with disaster increasingly, but also other development agendas, including obviously education and also the WASH agenda that I know there's some significant expertise across South Africa in that space as well. Next slide, please. The World Health Organization laid out a bit of an architecture of recommendations. The 6 interventions are reasonably well understood, but I'm going to focus today on the strategies to support drowning prevention intervention, because there are 2 of them that relate directly to your potential to either create a water safety council and then subsequently develop a water safety plan, because there are 2 strong recommendations that WHO makes. The first one is to promote multi-sectoral collaboration, and that's a recognition that if we all just do what we do, then we're likely to only influence one part of drowning prevention and reducing drowning. And of course, there's much, much more to be gained by working together, and whether that's working together as a range of life-saving organisations, whether it's working together as a range of charities, whether it's working together as a range of government departments that collaborate for the purpose, or whether it's throwing everyone together and trying to establish an agenda to reduce drowning. This is essentially multi-sectoral collaboration, but I do think that it also requires the organisation and coordination of a range of a complex range of stakeholders and sectors. And then the other one is the call for national water safety plans, which of course aren't restricted to be national water safety plans. You know, already in South Africa, you have a provincial water safety plan, and I think that was the intent of that recommendation. Next slide, please. I pondered the first question, and this is this question of coordinating agendas, and Dia has already signalled that that there's the potential to start talking about a statutory authority. I certainly don't pretend to understand the legalities of the South African legal frameworks as a relation to the formation of companies and organisations and the like. But what I thought I'd talk about just briefly is that this first objective is probably the most important one. The notion of getting everyone together around a table or on a single sheet of paper that agrees to commit to align resources, to share a vision, to work together in collaboration. Collaboration is not always easy, and so there really does need to be a strong commitment to the notion of working together and working together towards a common agenda, which may be articulated in a very simple outline of things you want to do and activities and symposiums you want to attend together, and particular targets that you have, or it could be much more complex in the formation of a water safety plan. By and large, having a look at the water safety councils, the coordinating mechanisms that exist across the globe, and there really aren't that many of them, but they tend to fall into three categories. There's the agendas which are fundamentally led and driven by government. And some examples of those agendas include the Thailand agenda, which is fundamentally nested in the Thai Public Health Ministry, and it's driven from that ministry down into the provinces. And they have a strategy that I'll briefly talk about in a moment. But it's very much government sets the agenda, government leads the agenda. They still intersect with NGOs, but it's very much government-led. And of course, Vietnam does the same. It's an interministerial panel. All of the government agencies get together. They're led by one ministry, and they have a plan, and they implement that plan and roll it out across the country. And Ireland is sort of a form of government-led. The Irish Water Safety Organisation is actually a statutory authority of government, and so essentially their plan comes with a certain government mandate. The second area of models for coordination of water safety or drowning prevention is what I describe as an NGO-led multi-stakeholder model. Often this can involve just NGOs. It can also involve NGOs with a government participation, and sometimes that government participation is hard, it's firm, it's at the table, and it's part of an alliance. And sometimes government plays more of an observer type role, and that obviously that's very much the remit of government, and governments will change, will decide that very differently. There have been some examples. The common examples here are the Australian example, which is largely NGO driven with government participation and observation. The New Zealand model, which is very much NGO driven with government observation participation. The Canadian model, which is largely NGO driven at this point in time. And the UK model is a coming together of a number of NGOs and a couple of government agencies also quite instrumental in the coordination of water safety in that particular UK model. I guess one of the things that's very important that there's been a few examples where NGOs have tried to do this by themselves, and there hasn't been sufficient momentum generated. And there's also been some examples where government have initiated a water safety agenda, a water safety plan, and then it stopped largely as a consequence of a change of government or a change of priorities. And I think that's one of the risks of COVID, is that some of the water safety agendas that are in existence won't be able to sustain a shifting in government budgets and priorities, which are a natural consequence of COVID. And the final one is government-led, but with some allowance for participation of NGOs and other stakeholders. And Ireland is somewhat that. It's also government-led. Philippines started with an NGO-led water safety council and is now firmly a government-led water safety agenda. And Singapore was very much government-led with some multi-stakeholder participation, but it is an example of one that hasn't sustained the time and it's really no longer active at this point in time. The key question is which one works? And I do think that it's horses for courses, if that's a terminology that translates across the globe. It's very much your decision and something that you really need to navigate. It really is about the context of your government, the context of relationships between the NGOs that are active in the field. It really does take a lot of commitment, and in many cases, the NGOs that have a 100% focus on reducing drowning or promoting water safety tends to be the organisations that will sustain this over the long term, but it's not possible without strong government commitment. Next slide, please. I just thought now what I'd do is give you some examples of some national water safety plans with a couple of lessons along the way, just to give you a sense of how people are approaching this particular problem. Next slide, please. The first one is the Australian Water Safety Strategy. We're now up to our 5th iteration of this particular agenda. It started as a plan. As I said, it was the merging of the Royal Life Saving Plan with the Surf Life Saving Plan and a few others. It was very much focused on education and rescue. But more recently, in Australia, we've adopted a more complex model that's looked at all of the issues of drowning across the nation. But the benefit of the Australian Water Safety Council strategy is that we're laying out a framework where Australia is a federated nation with lots of states or provinces. And so the objective of the Australian Water Safety Strategy is to set a national structure that then can be adopted at a state, a provincial level, or even at a local government level. And this is a version of the more recent Australian Water Safety Strategy that's not actually finished yet. But you can see that we're setting a structure that analyses the drowning problem and frames it from the perspective of people, of populations, of places, of activities and risk factors. And the idea here is that almost anyone can look at this particular structure and see themselves, see their organisation, see their province, see their local government jurisdiction, and find somewhere in the strategy that they can contribute. And so I think that setting a national structure for these water safety strategies is a good example of good practice. And there's plenty of evidence that it then flows through at a provincial level and even down into a local level in some work that I'm doing at the moment. So next slide, please. The second example that I thought would be useful for you to consider, Helen, next slide, please, is the UK example. The UK National Water Safety Forum is a number of key NGOs, including ROSPA, RNLI, Royal Life Saving UK, an alliance of police and fire brigades, the National Maritime Agency as well, the Coast Guard, and a few others. The beauty of the UK Water Safety Forum is I do think that they've got really clear strategic clarity in what they're trying to achieve. If you look at the right-hand side of the slide there, that might be a little bit obscured by my face. There's about 5 things that they've decided to do together. And so the first one is a really one that I'm very passionate about, which is to make sure that every primary school age child in the UK has access to swimming and water safety education. They then also focus on water risk. And with clarity, they're asking every manager of water safety body to have a risk management plan. And I do think very strongly in the UK is they have a much stronger burden of suicide and intentional drowning. And so they've made a very deliberate commitment to focus and understand that problem. So whereas the Australian Water Safety Strategy professes to have 15 different objectives and about 15 different activities in each of those objectives to try and find a place for everyone to feel like they can contribute to the Australian Water Safety Strategy. The UK one is much simpler and much clearer and much more focused in those 5 things that they're doing and sharing together. Next slide, please. The third example that I thought might be interesting to some of you is the New Zealand example. And this one focuses on building sector capacity. And so it's very, very deliberate in its focus on specific goals to reduce drowning and promote water safety in the New Zealand way, but also that it's a sector capacity strategy. And it had a very deliberate agenda to try and ensure that this water safety sector actually secured funds from government. And this was a 5-year journey for the Kiwis. And just more recently, they've had an announcement that the government has embraced this New Zealand water safety sector strategy and in fact funded it at a reasonable scale. So their objective is it's really only a 4-page document, but essentially they've worked together with a consultant to build a capacity building strategy that has secured funding from the NZ government. So again, that might be something that is of interest to you. Next slide, please. The fourth example that I thought I would share is the Thailand one. And so this is the example where government has initiated the plan, but I think it's really important, it's something that we've all missed for a number of years, is that it's not a drowning prevention plan, it's actually drowning prevention as a subset of a much bigger government agenda. And so aligning water safety or drowning prevention within other government agendas is really key to our success. And in this case, the Thai community has identified drowning as a subset of their national public health agenda. And so if you flick through the national public health agenda, which is a fully funded government agenda, there is only in fact 1 page within that 80-page agenda that is drowning prevention. And it's drowning prevention merged with road safety. But it really is a tremendous agenda, and they've done a really fantastic job of maintaining and sustaining that agenda. So alignment within government agendas is something that you may wish to consider at a national or a state provincial level. Next slide, please. I'm moving along. I understand I'm probably taking almost my 15 minutes. Next slide, please. The Canada model is fascinating for me because Canadians have been leaders in this field for many years. And Canadians, if you know them personally, they're always very diplomatic and very inclusive. And so their strategy and their coalition model is really open and inclusive, and it includes many, many organisations. They have states and territories and provinces like we both share. And so they've really gone about deliberately to try to include everyone that could possibly contribute to water safety or drowning prevention in their process. And it has been a 3-year journey to get to this point. And their plan is really comprehensive and very, very detailed. And the way they've gone about this is to create working groups, which is not something that I would always advocate, but it may be something that's necessary to get you up and running to create a South African specific agenda. Next slide, please. So they're the 5 examples that I thought are just teasers and not comprehensive analysis at all. And I'd really encourage you, as you progress through this particular journey, to go and have a look in more detail at each of those examples, but also some of the other examples that exist internationally. But then most importantly, it's important to understand that the only thing that matters is this is a South African-driven agenda. And the diversity of South Africa is probably going to mean that it will take a lot of work to pull together coalitions, big or small. There is no template. The World Health Organization talks about a 7-step process. I know of no successful 7-step process. Certainly, it's good to have a little bit of a guide, and you've got some good people in your community that can help guide you through this process. But there is no right way and there is no template, and it's really important that you, choose your own path and take some lessons from almost anyone, but make sure that it's very much South African driven. Establish some common goals is very important, whether it's the coalition or just the plan. A clear understanding of the problem is really, really important, and really have a look at the data and what the data tells you about what the issue is, because you might find that it's very different from your personal experience of what the key issues might be. In any of these agendas, it's really important to have some early wins in order to generate establish and generate some momentum. And I think one of the challenges in pulling together a coalition like this is just avoiding distractions and keeping your objectives quite elevated, and working together as much as possible. And given that you don't necessarily have any dedicated resources for this process, it's going to be really important that some of the key organisations and governments lean in and contribute their effort and energy to pull an agenda together. And certainly that's been the Australian experience. Is the Water Safety Council of Australia really wouldn't work without the effort and energy of Rural Life Saving and Surf Life Saving Australia. Certainly it's good to have the support of many other organisations, but without those two key players leaning in and aligning our resources, effort and energy, it probably wouldn't have sustained the momentum it's managed to sustain since 1998. So I'll conclude there, but I wish you all the best. It's a brave undertaking. It's an important undertaking. And I certainly think the diversity of the drowning prevention water safety issue in South Africa demands that you get together and act very quickly on this important issue. But thanks for your attention. My job now is to introduce Colleen. Colleen surprised me because I thought it was Colleen Saunders, but there's been a name change since Colleen did such a wonderful job at the World Conference on Drowning Prevention in Durban last year. Colleen was essentially the co-chair of the scientific program, and she did a lot more than that in terms of reaching out to many speakers and designing the scientific program. So Colleen is the Life Saving South Africa Scientific Advisor Committee Chair, and she's also at the University of Cape Town. So I'll hand you over to the very capable hands of Dr. Colleen. And I'm going to pronounce your surname very badly, but I can't even do it. I'm just going to call you Colleen Saunders because that's the way I've known you for a long time. Sorry about that. I should have rehearsed it. Over to Colleen.
Thanks very much, Justin. So I think there's a lot of confusion, and I've created it. My maiden name is Saunders, and because my academic history is Saunders, I've tried to keep it that way. But Capistanio is my married surname. I think I've seen about 3 different spellings of the surname in the flyers for this event. So maybe I see. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me and that nothing's frozen. If someone could just say yes in the. There we go.
Yes.
Thank you. Great. So firstly, I'm always nervous being the last speaker in these things because I know everybody runs over time, and then suddenly I've got 5 minutes to whip through my presentation. So thank you to both speakers that came before me. I think you've really set the scene very well, and what we really wanted for this webinar is for everyone to come away with a clear plan going forward. So very often we get together, we chat about these things, and we walk away without a very clear plan for moving forward. So we wanted to have some points to take forward that everybody can think about, and that we can start actioning toward this bigger plan for a Drowning Prevention Alliance. I'm going to rely quite heavily here on 2 documents. Justin has already alluded to them. So the WHO Global Report on Drowning, which I think was published in 2014, was really a mammoth task by people in the field, and it came up with this list of 10 sort of priorities for preventing drowning. I've put them there on the slide, but want to just draw your attention to number 8 and 9. I think it's 8 and 9. It is quite small, but I'll speak through it. So these really speak to trying to bring together different stakeholders in the sector to start trying to work together. I think particularly in South Africa, where resources are limited and we are sort of siloed under different areas or sectors, we all tend to hold on to our little pot of funding, do what we can with it, and try to stake out our piece of the ground and defend it. And I think we, as a drowning prevention and water safety community in South Africa, really have to change our mindset to think about how we're going to work together with other sectors that are well supported and well funded in order to meet our objectives, but also how we can support each other and work together. One of the recommendations out of that WHO report was also around developing a national water safety plan. And this is something that we've spoken about quite a lot within the community before. And I think Justin has alluded to the benefits of having something like that at a national level, where the objectives and the strategies are filtered down to provincial and local government. All of our charities and public benefit organizations can look to that and try and structure and strategize around that plan as well. And so I think sorry, I'm going to just minimize the chat. I'm following the chat as I try and present. So I think what we would really like to do going forward out of this is to increase address those two objectives. So really try and pull all the stakeholders together and try and see how we can work across different sectors in South Africa. And then to use the objective of developing a water safety plan for South Africa as a way to bring all of us together for a common goal. So Justin very kindly ended off his presentation saying that there's no 7-point plan, that he hasn't seen any success in a 7-point plan, and I'm about to tell you how we're going to follow a 7-point plan. But I think, so Justin's comments are definitely noted, and he has a lot of experience in terms of setting these things up internationally. But I think that there's been a lot of work that's gone into this WHO guide on implementing the recommendations from the initial report on drowning. In that, Helen, if you could switch to the next slide. In that is a framework with 7 points. I won't call it a 7-point plan, but what it creates is a structure for us to follow, whether we stay on that path I think remains to be seen as we put this alliance together and it's guided by the people in it. But I think it's a good starting point when we have nothing. There's, a lot of experts have, including Justin, I think have come together and said that these 7 things are concepts that need to be addressed when starting to put this together. So I think for us, probably the first step is really, well, the first couple of steps is really to look at the drowning prevention and water safety priorities in South Africa. We have some data around fatal drowning in South Africa, not a lot on non-fatal drowning. We don't understand a lot about the behaviors and the things that guide and influence behavior in South Africa. We don't understand a lot about rural drowning and very low resource settings. But what we do have is enough data to move forward. So I think those of you that have been involved in some of our data collection will know that it moves slowly. And so we don't want to wait until we fully understand the situation before we act. And I think we have enough information to start, bearing in mind that we will have to collect data and continue to increase our understanding as we move forward with this. The second step in our not 7-point plan is to establish some leadership around trying to put a national water safety plan together. And I think this is where this Drowning Prevention Alliance, whatever we end up calling it, comes together. And so that is the people on this call, as well as some others that are probably missing from this webinar, but starting to come together, talk about it, share our experiences and our understanding of the context in which we operate, and establish a body that can help to elevate our actions and bring them to the attention of the people that are able to, fund us, give resources, give support. I think probably the biggest step for us now going forward is to map our stakeholders. I was very pleased to see just how many different sectors and organizations are represented here on the webinar. I think there are more that are missing. So probably the biggest thing for us right now is to try and map these stakeholders and pull in more people from different sectors. So some that are traditionally underrepresented in these discussions that we've had before are disaster risk reduction. So I know there are some of our disaster management colleagues on the call. So our colleagues from the water, sanitation and hygiene sector, so engineers, those working out in low resource communities that really understand the day-to-day activities of people living in South Africa, which is what Justin alluded to, something that's quite different in drowning in low resource settings compared to high income settings. We really need to engage our colleagues in health, so in the healthcare sector, EMS, public health, and social development. So I think a lot of those are perhaps missing from the call here. And we as a community need to try and identify who we can pull in and how we can really make this a cohesive effort across sectors. The fourth step is to define a framework, so something that we use to organize or structure a national water safety plan around. You will see, I think Mzi has popped a little survey, a Google form into the chat, and we'll circulate that again afterwards by email. And I'm going to ask that our colleagues complete that survey. What it is a little form that tries to get a feel for what sector or what organization you represent, what you feel the strengths of your organization are and that you can bring to the table for in a Drowning Prevention Alliance. And also, what are the things that guide your operational strategy? So for those of you in government, you know, you may have to follow certain government strategic plans, which, as Justin said, with the TIE program, you know, may be broader than just drowning, but you within your work have to follow those strategic plans. And I think for us to move forward, we really need to understand the frameworks that everybody has to or is beholden to in terms of their work. So does your organization have a strategy, or, you know, do you work to meet the SDGs? What is it that defines your work? So I've asked you just to give us an indication in that survey of what it is. The fifth step is really to set very specific objectives and to plan some interventions to meet those objectives. And again, in that survey, I've asked you to indicate what you think are the biggest problems affecting your ability, or the biggest challenges that you experience in your work. And when I say work, I understand that many people on this call are volunteers as well. So paid work in some cases, and volunteer work in others that are public benefit organizations and charities. But really in trying to carry out your organizational strategy or objectives, what are the challenges that you face that you think an organization like this, so bringing together many different levels of expertise and experience, what is it that are our key objectives, or the easy wins, as Justin spoke about? I think in order to get to 6, which is to gain government endorsement, official, I think we first need to be able to take something to government. I think most of us in our experiences dealing with trying to get things recognized have found that it's very difficult to even get a meeting or something if you can't put something on paper and take it to government and say, this is what we'd really like to move forward, can you help us? So I think there's a lot of work that we need to do as an alliance before we get to step 6 of our non-7-step plan. But in order to do that, we need to gain some collective understanding of where we want to take this and what we want it to be. And then really it comes down to implementing it and monitoring and evaluating our programs and interventions. So I really want to just emphasize that, you know, we speak a lot about high quality research and doing research on these things. And I think that scares a lot of people, because research is this big idea that many people perhaps don't understand. But it's really about looking at whether or not a program works, and whether or not we should be investing our money in it. We have very limited resources in South Africa, and so we want to make sure we're putting the money where it's needed. And so I think building in these monitoring and evaluation steps, which is not necessarily a research project, it can just be making sure that things work, or monitoring whether or not, evaluating whether or not they do, is really, really important to build into our water safety plan as well. So I'm going to leave it there. I've got I see some time warnings popping up, but what I'm going to ask is, if you could, in the chat, you should be able to link out to the Google form. You are welcome to forward it on to whoever you think might be interested in joining us and add value. So please do. And I'll ask if you could perhaps do that in the next couple of days, so that we can start pulling that information together and seeing where the gaps are, and approaching other people to contribute as well. Thank you very much for your attention and for joining us. I think I'm going to hand back to Helen, who will field any questions.
Thank you very much, Colleen, Daya, and Justin. So we have a few minutes left. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes, so we have a little bit of time to answer a few questions. The first one that we have from our timeline, from our chat room, is from Personal Lifeguard Services, from Michael Maggs. What is the timeline for the non-7-step plan?
Okay, the million-dollar question. So I think there are, the first couple of steps, sorry, Di, I'm going to jump in and answer. I see you've also switched to Michael. I think there's definitely, within the first couple of steps, so the situational assessments and starting to pull stakeholders together, those are things that can happen synchronously now. I'm hoping that within a month, we could have a really solid list of stakeholders that are starting to engage. I know there are plans between NSRI has some symposia coming up, and I think LSA wants to put a few more of these webinars, a series of webinars together, which hopefully can start to bring people together more often so that we keep the momentum going. But certainly putting those stakeholders together and starting to have those very real conversations around setting objectives and moving it forward, I'm going to say within a month. To put a plan together certainly will take a little bit longer, something concrete in writing, bearing in mind that we've got December holidays and things coming up as well. But within the first quarter of next year, it would be good to have some very real objectives and at least a advanced draft of a plan together.
Okay. Thank you, Colleen. Any further questions? You can raise your hand if you wish to speak, or you can type it into the chat line.
Helen, can I comment as well?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. I think if we look at hosting a second in the series towards the end of November, what we would like to see at least is, even if it's a loose collection, a loose forum of organizations that we can then begin to chart the way forward in 2021. So I think a short-term milestone is that let's look at by end of November to at least get a forum going so that that forum can start organizing. We certainly don't want it to look as if Life Saving South Africa is the absolute lead organization. We're prepared to do whatever it takes to facilitate the process to having a collective approach and a collaborative approach. So I would advocate that we don't mind hosting another one by the end of November, but we should then get individuals like yourselves to raise your hand so that we can have this collective that will move us into 2021. And Colleen, will pull together the survey of information that you would have sent. I thank you.
Thanks, Daya. I'm just going to hand over to Mzi if we have got nobody else who wishes to raise any questions. Mzi?
Okay, thank you, Helen, and good afternoon, everyone. Well, thank you for coming. Well, my job
it's 11 hours.
My job is quite simple and straightforward, just to say thank you to everyone that has participated. And firstly, I would like to extend our thanks to Justin Scar, for your presentation. And indeed, I am in agreement that there is no proper plan probably that is in place. And I would also like to reiterate what Daya has just said, that probably that plan will come up within the stakeholders. So once they start coming together and chart their way forward collectively. And of course, this is not a Life Saving South Africa initiative. We are interested in making sure that all stakeholders within to come together within their expertise, so that we're able to have a way forward as far as the Drowning Alliance is concerned. And I think most importantly, one of the aim is to make sure that we start eliminating the silos, eliminating the us and them kind of scenario, where all of us are able to come to one table and be able to provide strategic direction that South Africa actually needs as far as the drowning prevention. All of us here, we are very much aware, we are very much informed that drowning, it is indeed preventable. But however, there are a number of challenges that are always at play that will need a number of heads to come together and start mapping that particular way forward. Well, without taking much of your time, and I also have another meeting that is coming up, and I would like to extend our thanks to all the presenters who have presented, who have shared their experience, who have shared their knowledge, especially to you, Justin, your international experience and the different models that we have shown in terms of how can we probably start thinking towards establishing this particular adventure. And to you, Daya, as well for your presentation. I would like to thank you as well, and Colleen, and the organizing team that organized this particular event, Helen. We thank you, and participants, those who have participated, we want to thank you. And of course, we are calling on you guys to come up and sign in this particular form, and also share it widely to those who have not participated, that we may not have their information within our database. And that's all from me, and thank you so much for attending. We are hoping to see you again. We are currently in talks with Dr. Shane Brown, which is the next seminar that is on flooding and disaster and risk mitigation. Probably that will be at the end of November. And we'll let you guys know as soon as that we've got that confirmation from her. And other than that, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. I see Kitty's hand is up.
Yes.
Okay.
Just one last.
Thank you, Helen. A very good presentation. I might have been, my question actually might have been responded to directly or indirectly. I wanted to find out the role of government, and especially local government in council, taking into account that, they're at the coalface and they deal with a lot of drowning incidences. In terms of, when they're providing lifeguard services, especially to coastal local authorities. I just wanted to get guidance in terms of their role in this particular council, and also when it comes to implementation as well. But on the other hand, I'm thinking maybe as things go along, the role of local government will become clearer and clearer, bearing in mind that this is the first meeting. And as we unpack and we ventilate some of the issues, we will be able to know exactly where we fit in as local government. Thank you.
Helen, can I quickly respond?
Sure, we have run out of time, so we do need to shut the meeting down
Okay.
So we don't have much time to do that.
Yeah. Thank you, Kitty, for that very, very important question. I think that there's an ideal opportunity for all of us to work together with local government. As Justin said, there are some very easy wins. There's some low-hanging fruit. For example, common signage. You know, our local citizens as well as international tourists, if they go from one city, if they come to Port Elizabeth and they have a holiday and then they go to Cape Town, they should be able to understand the signage, because the signage should be seamless and common from one city to the next. If you drive around South Africa, you'll see different signages in different beaches. So that's something that we can actually collaborate on. And secondly, for example, qualification fraud. We do know that some municipalities, employ individuals with fake qualifications. We can actually ensure that we have the best lifeguards employed by municipalities, because at the end of the day, you also don't want municipalities to face lawsuits when somebody drowns and they find out that the lifeguards were either not qualified, or they were not fit enough, or they were not updated in terms of their retest and things like that. So I believe that we have a very, very, we have low-hanging fruit that we can achieve through this particular alliance. So I hope that helps to give some indication of the collaboration and what can be achieved. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everybody, and we will conclude this webinar. We really look forward to carrying this forward, and we will hopefully see you and chat to you again in November.